This is Heather Lewis from Animal Arts, and I'm going to be talking to you about systems to keep things clean. By the way, this is a biofilm, in case you're wondering what that fuzzy stuff is. The key to designing a veterinary hospital to keep it clean is to understand biological risk. You, as a veterinarian, understand this better than anybody. But you'll find this somewhat interesting. UC Davis has listed various biological risks in this category here, from most risk to least risk. So fomite transmission, which is contaminated objects that spread disease from one place to another, is the number one way that disease spreads in a veterinary hospital. The number one way. And maybe that's not what we would have thought. Environmental contamination comes next, direct contact third, and airborne transmission last. This is really amazing to us because we've been spending all this time for the last 30 years talking about how to keep air flowing in a veterinary hospital, when actually it is the fourth cause of disease transmission. That's not to say it's not important, but these other things are more important. So before we talk about how to wipe the floor, let's talk about how disease spreads and understand it. Speaking of floors, let's keep the floor clear. That's the best way to start cleaning up your veterinary hospital. If you got things hanging from the ceiling and hanging on the walls, that's a much better situation than cluttering up the floor. It's really, really hard to clean a hospital or a clinic if the floor is cluttered. So that is the best way. And that's a design philosophy, thinking about how to keep the floor clear. There are a lot of other things that come into environmental contamination or reducing fomite transmission, such as having convenient hand-washing sinks, or having cages that are laid out in such a way that you don't have to excessively handle the patients, or having things laid out in such a way that you're not walking through the isolation room to get from point A to point B. Those are important, but if I could give you one take-home message from today, it would be keep the floor clear. Sure helps a lot. With thinking about run layout and drain placement, I think it's really important to understand how your staff is going to be cleaning the runs. These are details that you're not, as a veterinarian, going to worry about. At the end of the day, you're going to go home or you're going to be there making the money. You're not going to be spraying the place down, most likely. But if you could get the details taken care of ahead of time so that whoever's doing that job is doing it in a way that spreads the least amount of disease and keeps the place clean the most effectively, that'll be the best way for you to have peace of mind. So for us, we think of drains always going in the back of runs, because you never want a drain in the front of a run, because in order to clean it, you have to walk to the back and spray towards the drain, in which case you've just walked through the dirty floor. It's very simple. Think of cleaning from clean to dirty. Speaking of cleaning, let's talk for a moment about water.
Water's not necessarily your friend when it comes to actually cleaning. It used to be in old school, we always assumed that we had hot water, and if you threw more hot water at something, you're making things better. But that's not necessarily where things are going. We often use chemical cleaners nowadays, and the real process here is actually to not depend on the heat to make things cleanable.
Yeah, the technology is there to reduce the hot water, and in fact there's no way that you can really use hot water to clean, because by the time you heat it up enough to clean with it, it's actually so hot it would scald an employee.
This is not good.
And this is not good. And if you temper it, then you're just not getting the job done. So there are disinfection chemicals on the market now that have been tested that are just as effective in cold water.
And the nice thing about using water in areas also is that you can use it for exploding your cabinets. So,
that's right. Yeah, and this actually leads to a great point, that you really have to think about how the room is constructed, whether or not it's really a hosable environment or if it's not. And I've seen horror stories of people putting in plastic laminate in rooms that are really not designed to be hosed, and then hosing them. And oh boy, that's a bad scene.
Not a good situation.
It really doesn't allow those cabinets to hold up over time, and that actually just increases the chance of those environments getting contaminated. Shelters, 7 years after construction, animal shelters tend to start showing a lot more disease outbreaks, and a lot of this has to do with environmental contamination and biofilms that grow over that length of time, and they're difficult to clean. So if we can take water out of the picture as much as possible and use wiping and other methods for cleaning, then we actually reduce the growth of biofilms and other kinds of infrastructure that is really difficult to remove. So if you're going to hose clean a room, so there's probably 1 or 2 rooms in your veterinary hospital that you're going to hose clean, then you have to take a much more comprehensive view of how that room is constructed in order to keep it from becoming contaminated. So you need seamless floors and walls, you need a sanitary base, rot-resistant backing to your wall material. You need to think about cabinet materials, because most plastic laminate materials will actually just explode when they're exposed to water. So you might even need to go to a stainless steel counter in that room. Thinking about ceiling fixtures, like having gasketed light fixtures, or caging material, making sure your caging material can stand up to the cleaning. These are all the types of conversations you have to get into if you're hose cleaning. So I would say just simplify as much as possible where you're actually using a hose. For caging, building in caging can really help you with reducing what's left of airborne contamination, because then you can think about ventilating the cage instead of the room. By ventilating the cage instead of the room, you're dealing with contaminated air right at the source. And it also then deals with the animal and protecting the animal's welfare. So cat doesn't want to smell a dirty litter pan any more than you or I do. So if we can get air right to the animal, then we're taking care of that animal to the best of our abilities and actually reducing the number of air changes we need to put into the room. This seems like a silly thing to talk about in a talk about reducing the spread of disease, but it's actually one of the most important topics, and that's stress reduction, especially for cats. Stress and disease are directly correlated. And while that may not be important in the small amount of time that a cat is in a veterinary hospital, it is important in the overall lifetime of that cat and in your client's experience. So if you can reduce the stress that occurs in a veterinary hospital when a cat comes in and is put in a cage, then everybody is better off. Stress reduces recovery time, stress affects behavior, and stress irks your clients. For cleaning a run, we prefer individual drains to trench drains, and I'll tell you why. Trench drains spread disease from one run to the next. It is just almost impossible to keep a trench drain clean, and they tend to cross-contaminate. And we talked about environmental contamination being the number 2 cause of disease spread. Why would you want to have a drain that goes from one run to the next? They also use a lot of water. So if you can use individual drains and your project allows it, that's a much better way to control the spread of disease. When you're thinking about all of these things that go into keeping your hospital clean, understand the big picture. Go back to managing biological risk and what's really important. Washing hands, reducing fomite transmission. Those are actually more important than dumping a huge amount of air into your building. So understand the big picture and reduce the urge that you have to overcomplicate the design, and just think about, what do you need? What's the simplest way to get the job done? Do you really need to hose that room? If you don't, you're actually probably in a better spot. So reduce overcomplication and just keep it simple and understand the big picture, and you go home at the end of the day and somebody else cleans the place.